One sentence, as sharp as a verdict, was all it took. Christianity is finished. These words come from one of Italy's most progressive cardinals. But when you really analyze those words, you realize there's much more behind them, something that has never emerged so openly. Stay with us. What's about to come to light has never happened before. In Assisi, the atmosphere was almost suspended, and not only because the Umbrian setting immediately evokes a certain ancient silence. The bishops had arrived to commemorate the 800th anniversary of the death of St. Francis, but the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. It seemed more like a gathering called to reckon with a burning present. The so-called Franciscan citadel, usually filled with pilgrims and school children, for a moment became a reflection of a church that, within, clearly sensed a change in the air. It is in this simple and almost disarming setting that Zuppi's words took on weight, as if the place itself invited us to look at reality without filters. The scene was almost like a flash that froze the room. In front of the assembled bishops, the cardinal let slip that phrase that no one really wanted to hear, but which had been in the air for years. He said that Christianity is finished, and he did so with the naturalness of someone who is stating a fact, as if he was saying that the sun has set. Yet the effect was that of a sudden slap, because hearing him say it like that, in front of the episcopate, made everything more real. Immediately afterward, he tried to redress the blow by assuring that Christianity is not finished, but the feeling remained. Something great has broken, and now we must face it. The idea that for centuries it was enough to be born in Italy to automatically breathe a Christian climate no longer holds up, and this is confirmed not by just any commentator, but by the cardinal who leads that very church, which until yesterday seemed unwilling to openly admit its collapse. In short, Zuppi said what many were thinking in hushed tones, transforming a suspicion into real, clear, inevitable news. The picture of decline, which until a few years ago seemed almost like a warning from the usual pessimists, has now become all too concrete. Sunday masses are visibly emptying, and it's no longer a matter of a few empty benches. In many parishes, emptiness has become the norm, as if Sunday had completely lost its center. Young people, who once flocked to church between wedding preparations and their children's baptisms, today don't show up at all, not because they've chosen otherwise, but because for them, a connection with faith is no longer even an option on the table. Even the basic sacraments, those that were once administered almost automatically, are no longer taken for granted. More and more children are not baptized, and more families are growing up without any contact with Christian life. And it is precisely here that the paradox that many pretend not to see emerges. The decline does not come only from outside, as if it were the fault of a wicked and distracted society, but also arises from certain internal choices within the Church, especially from that modernist current that in recent decades has pushed for a continuous, almost frenetic adaptation to the tastes of the world. The result? In an attempt to please everyone, the Church has ended up no longer speaking with its own voice, and its message has become watered down to the point of being unrecognizable. It is ironic, almost cruel, that precisely figures considered progressive and perceived as the heirs of this way of thinking, including Zuppi, now find themselves denouncing the end of Christianity. Because the numbers, data in hand, show that the season of openness without borders has not brought crowds into the classrooms. It has made them leave in silence. Every time a piece of doctrine has been bracketed to be more welcoming, a portion of the faithful has stopped recognizing the church as their home. And so, paradoxically, the rush to modernize everything has ended up removing the very thing that made Catholicism a fixed point, a clear voice, a direction, an identity. The most surprising and ultimately most disturbing thing is that just as the end of Christianity is being denounced, the CEI has approved a document that seems to go in the opposite direction to what is needed to halt the collapse. Yeast of Peace and Hope, this is the title, was presented as a text of renewal, but reading it without filters, the feeling is different. Morality is diluted, pastoral care is made vaguer, language is toned down to the point of losing that clarity that once marked the difference between the church and the rest of the world. Doctrine is no longer spoken of forcefully, what the faith demands is no longer clearly reiterated, and everything is wrapped up in a synodal rhetoric that seems more interested in not disturbing anyone than in truly guiding anyone. The paradox is evident. The faithful are dwindling, practice is becoming empty, Catholic culture is evaporating, and instead of rediscovering a firm voice, another season of listening, dialogue, and co-responsibility is being proposed, as if the problem were organizational and not spiritual. And here the question arises: could it not be precisely these figures, progressive in their intentions, modern in their language, inclined to soften rather than confirm, who have contributed to the decline they denounce today? Benedict XVI had said it with a clarity that today sounds almost prophetic. The church would become smaller, more essential, stripped of many structures and certainties, but precisely for this reason, more authentic. He did not speak of a collapse, but of a purification, of a return to the roots that would allow the gospel to speak with a new force. Yet, looking at what is happening today, it is natural to ask whether that little church is not at risk of being reduced in number, but also emptied in substance. Because that's precisely the point. Remaining few is not a problem. Benedict had made it clear. The real risk is remaining few and having forgotten what it means to be truly Catholic. With figures like Zuppi and a pastoral approach that tends to water down morality and identity, the prospect becomes even more paradoxical. A Catholic minority could even be the leaven of a rebirth, but only if it maintains its faith, its doctrine, and its back straight. If, however, the remaining minority is made up of believers who grew up in a climate where everything is relative, where boundaries have become nuanced, and where progressivism has replaced continuity, then that smallness will not be a seed. It will only be an empty shell. And at that point, we understand how precious, almost indispensable, is the role of those who remain steadfast in tradition, not out of nostalgia, but out of fidelity, not out of rigidity, but out of love for the truth. It is precisely this group, often viewed with suspicion, that could ultimately become the true starting point. Because when everything crumbles, those who preserve the memory of what is essential become the rock on which to rebuild. At a time when the Church seems to be losing the contours of its identity, those who guard tradition are not an obstacle, but the last thread that prevents the rift from becoming irreparable. If you feel the need to rediscover the peace, beauty, and depth of authentic faith, let Gregorian chant accompany you. Visit Fides et Traditio. You'll find voices, prayers, and sounds that bring the heart back to the silence of God. Find the link in the description. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.